Deborah was on her morning walk when a stranger knocked her to the ground. He thought no one was watching, but he was wrong. Elon Musk saw it all, and what happened next shocked the world. The sun was about to rise, and the street was deserted except for birdsong. Deborah adjusted the waistband of her hoodie, the dirty sidewalk creaking with each step. This was her daily routine, a leisurely walk around her neighborhood in Scottsdale, Arizona. It was her way of staying active, clearing her mind, and feeling connected to the world. The houses were quiet, the trucks were empty, and the gentle breeze signaled that the heat of the day was still far away. Deborah reached Millhouse Avenue, her favorite part of the route. A row of golden trees stretched along the street, their white leaves forming an arch like a cathedral. She smiled, enjoying these small moments of peace. Then she saw him. The bike was lying on the sidewalk, as if it had been abandoned in a hurry. The man beside her was agitated, his shoes clicking on the concrete. Deborah instinctively quickened her pace. Something about his movements didn't seem right. Erratic, impatient. He kept looking at his phone and then at the street, as if he was waiting for someone. His hair stood on end when he saw her approaching. "Excuse me," Deborah said politely, trying to get past. The man didn't move. Instead, he blocked her path completely. "Watch where you're going," he growled. His voice was hard, almost accusatory. Deborah hesitated, crouching down. "I'm just trying to get through," she replied. "You old people think you own the sidewalk," he retorted. Deborah felt a lump in her throat. For the first time in years, she felt something unexpected, fear. She studied the man closely. His clothes were disheveled, his knee bruised. There was something about the way he moved, like a storm cloud about to explode. "Please," she tried again, her voice firmer. "Let me through." The man's lip curled into a smile. "What did you just tell me?" Deborah's heart stopped. She didn't want to confront him, but the energy between them changed. It was like a switch had been flipped, and in that moment, Deborah knew something was very, very wrong. Time seemed to slow as Deborah felt the ground, her breathing quickening. The man's eyes narrowed into dark slits, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Something about his posture screamed volatility. She took a step back instinctively, her brain racing to find the right words to de-escalate the situation. "Look, I don't want any trouble," Deborah said, keeping her voice calm even as her pulse pounded in her ears. But he wasn't listening. "You think you're better than me, huh?" His voice was a low scream, like a wire about to snap. Deborah opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say a word, it happened. His fist shot forward, a blur of motion that came out of nowhere. Deborah barely registered the blow before she felt it impact her face squarely. Hot pain exploded across her face, knocking her down. Her feet wobbled, and in a blinding instant, she was on the ground. The rough pavement scraped her palms as she tried to catch herself, gasping for air as she gasped for air. For a moment, everything was silent. Deborah stood there, her brain trying to process what had happened. Her face throbbed, her hands ached, and tears welled up in the corners of her eyes. Not from sadness, but from shock. The man pulled away from her, his neck tense, his lips curved in a satisfied smile. "Next time, stay out of my way," he yelled, getting back on his bike as if nothing had happened. Deborah struggled to her feet. Her hands were shaking, and anger bubbled through her veins. How could someone do this? How could a stranger, someone who didn't even know her, just walk away like that? "Help!" she managed to scream, even though her voice sounded weak, almost strange. It was then that she heard it. A car door slamming, footsteps steady and heavy, growing louder by the second. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The voice wasn't hers, nor was it a neighbor's. It was deep, deliberate, and incredibly authoritative. Deborah turned her head slowly, fighting back pain and confusion. And there he was, Elon Musk. At first, her brain couldn't process it. How could it? Elon Musk, one of the most recognizable men in the world, stood just a few feet away, wearing dark jeans and a crisp t-shirt. His face was serious, stone cold. "Did you just hit her?" Musk shouted, his gaze fixed on the man. The cyclist hesitated, caught between fight and flight, his eyes darting from Elon to the bike and back again. "None of your business," he muttered, though his voice cracked a little. "Oh, it's my business now," Elon said. He held up his phone, the screen already recording. "You just assaulted a woman in broad daylight. You think I'm going to let you get away with that?" The man's face paled as he realized who he was dealing with. This wasn't just a neighbor. This was Elon Musk, the billionaire. The man with more social media followers than he could count. The weight of this reality hit like a sword. Deborah, still on the ground, couldn't believe what she was seeing. It seemed surreal, like something out of a movie. "Apologize." "Now," Musk said clearly, his voice cutting through the tense air. The man hesitated, his knees shaking. But as Elon approached, his phone still recording, the cyclist turned and shouted, "Sorry." He wasn't sincere. Deborah could hear that. But it didn't matter. Musk knelt down beside her. "Are you okay?" he asked, turning his attention back to Deborah as he put away his phone. Deborah cried softly, one hand still cupping her face. "I'll be fine," she managed to say, though her voice cracked. "Don't worry, I have it all on tape," Musk said. "He's not going to get away with this." The cyclist, realizing his escape was blocked, got on his bike and pedaled furiously down the street. Musk didn't chase him. Instead, he stopped, watching the man disappear. Deborah sat down, feeling shaken but relieved. "Thank you," she said softly, looking at him. "I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Musk replied, offering his hand. "But I promise this isn't over." Deborah didn't know how true those words were. This was just the beginning. She held Elon Musk's hand as she stood up. The pain still throbbed across her face, but the shock of the situation had subsided. Her mind was racing with questions she couldn't articulate. But one thing was clear. Elon Musk had just saved her. Elon looked at her. "You need to sit down. Here, let me help you to my car." She followed him, each step feeling heavier than the last. Elon opened the door of a sleek Tesla parked on the corner and gestured for her to get in. The interior was immaculate, smelling something clean, like new machinery. Deborah sat back down on the bench with a slow sigh, her body finally allowing itself to feel how shaken she was. Outside, Elon stood by the car, his phone still in his hand. He was calling the police. Deborah could hear snatches of the conversation. Clear, unhesitating words describing the attacker, his bike, and the direction he'd fled. It wasn't long before the first patrol car arrived. The sound of sirens cut through the quiet morning air, a jarring reminder of what had happened. A young officer stepped out of the car, notepad in hand, his eyes darting from Elon to the woman in the passenger seat. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked, his voice measured but concerned. "I guess so," Deborah murmured, her hands still pressed gently against her face. "She was assaulted," Elon said firmly, turning to the officer. "I recorded the whole thing. You're going to want to see this." He held up his phone, tilting the screen to reveal the recording. The officer's expression changed as he watched. His jaw dropped, and his lips pressed into a hard line. "We'll get this guy, sir. Do you have a description?" "I've already done it," replied Elon, crossing his arms over his chest. There was something about his posture, calm but intense, that made even the officer stand a little straighter. As Elon sent the video, Deborah sat in her car, watching the scene unfold. For years, she had walked this same route without a second thought. Never in her life had she been attacked, much less pushed, in her own neighborhood. But here she was, sitting in a Tesla driven by one of the most famous entrepreneurs on the planet, watching the police make statements, as if her morning had been part of some strange hyperrealism. "Ma'am," the officer said kindly, approaching the car. "We need you to come to the police station later to make a full statement. Are you sure you're okay to go now?" Deborah nodded slowly. "I'll be fine. Thank you." The officer gave him a small wave before heading back to his patrol car, where he began reporting the details to dispatch. Elon walked back to the driver's side of the Tesla and got in. "Let me take you home," he said. Her tone was soft, but there was no argument. "Thank you for everything," Deborah said. Elon didn't respond immediately. Instead, he started the car, and the Tesla rolled down the street with silent precision. As they drove, Deborah stared out the window, watching the familiar houses pass by. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly. Elon looked at her, his face inscrutable. Because no one deserves to be treated like that. And because I could. Deborah thought about it. Because I could. Such a simple answer. But it made sense. How many people saw her struggle and simply looked away? If Elon Musk hadn't been there, would anyone have intervened? I've never been a part of anything like this, she admitted, her voice soft. Well, Elon said, a hint of amusement in his voice. You're about to be a part of so much more. Deborah looked at him. What do you mean? Elon smiled slowly as he rounded a bend. Let's just say this video won't stay private. And just like that, Deborah's peaceful life was about to be turned upside down. The world was about to see what had happened. And nothing would be the same after that. Deborah had barely stepped foot in her modest living room when her phone started ringing. Once, twice, and then it wouldn't stop. She sat on the couch, the ink in her famous voice sinking into the surreal chaos of the day. She flipped open her phone and stared at it. Missed calls, text messages, from friends, neighbors, even from a daughter she hadn't spoken to in months. Deborah, are you okay? You're all over the internet. Her heart sank. Before she could process it, there was a knock on the door. Firm, loud. Her pulse quickened. Again, she hesitated. But then she heard a voice outside. It's me, Elon. Deborah opened the door slowly, still unsure of how to navigate the fact that Elon Musk, was standing in her doorway. He was holding a small bag. I brought ice packs and some aspirin. You're going to need these. Thank you, Deborah said politely, blessing him inwardly. As she sat on the couch with the ice gently pressed against her face, Elon pulled up a chair next to her. He was scrolling through his phone, the blue light reflecting softly in his eyes. It's already going viral, he said. Deborah swallowed. What is it? He turned the screen to her. The video of the attack, clear and high resolution, unexpected evidence of what had happened, was being shared on social media. The caption read, Man assaults elderly woman. Elon Musk steps in and defends her. Justice will be served. Deborah stared at the video, unable to look away. In just a few hours, it had racked up millions of views, thousands of comments. Strangers, people she didn't know, were rising up in her defense. Damn you. What kind of man hits an old woman? Elon, you're a hero for stepping in. She felt a lump in her throat. I didn't want this, she said. I didn't ask for this. Elon smiled. I understand. But sometimes the world needs to see things like this. Deborah met his gaze. Why? Because it wakes people up, he said simply. There's a lot of evil that people ignore. This guy, he thought no one would stop him, that no one would care. But now, everyone cares. He's not going to get away with this. Deborah let those words sink in. A part of her didn't want the attention, didn't want to be a legend. But deep down, she couldn't deny the truth. If no one had seen, if no one had cared, that man would still be out there, hands ready, waiting for his next victim. Her phone rang again. This time, a call. She answered it hesitantly. Deborah? It's Margaret from Channel 6 News. We'd like to speak with you about this morning's incident. Deborah pulled away, her hand shaking a little. Elon stood. It'll be like this for a while. The next 2 days were a blur. The news ran the story across all networks. Images of the attack played on a loop, alongside reports praising Elon Musk for intervening. Billionaire hero steps in to save elderly woman. Even though Deborah doesn't feel saved, she felt exposed. She stopped answering the phone. She turned off the television. Every knock on the door made her flinch. Her quiet life had been shattered, and the world, strangers with opinions and praise and anger, had moved in where peace used to be. But on the third day, something unexpected happened. There was a knock, softer this time. Deborah opened the door to find a small bouquet of flowers on her doorstep. Attached was a note. You are stronger than you think. Thank you for reminding us to take care. A stranger. Deborah stood for a long moment, staring at the flowers. The lump in her throat returned, but this time, it wasn't from fear or anxiety. It was something different, something like hope. She looked out at the street, where life seemed to go on as usual, but something had changed, hadn't it? Not just for her, for a lot of people, and she was finally ready to see it for herself. 3 weeks later, the bruises on Deborah's arm had faded, but the incident had left a deeper mark than anything visible. She still took her morning walks, though her steps were more cautious now. Friends offered to accompany her, but Deborah politely declined. "I won't let a man steal my independence," she said firmly. The attack, Elon Musk's intervention, and the viral storm that followed redefined his world. Strangers sent messages of support. Some shared their own experiences of being ignored, mistreated, or hurt. For Deborah, it was a strange comfort to know she wasn't alone. That what happened to her mattered, not just for her, but for the world. She watched Elon's video again, this time, not with fear, but with understanding. It wasn't just a recording of her pain. It was evidence, proof that people like her, ordinary, invisible people, were worth defending. Then the day of the trial arrived. Deborah sat at the front of the courtroom, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The man who had attacked her stood a few feet away, looking smaller than she remembered. He avoided her gaze as the judge reviewed the case. Elon didn't need to be there, but he showed up anyway. Dressed simply, he sat silently in the back of the room, observing. His presence sent a message without him having to say a word. When the judge handed down the sentence, community service, anger management, and a suspended sentence, Deborah took a deep breath, a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was justice, and that was enough. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed like bees. Deborah walked among them, head held high. When someone asked if she had anything to say, she stopped, looking out at the sea of cameras. "I want people to remember this," she said plainly. "Speaking up for someone, anyone, can change everything." A reporter shouted, "Do you have a message for the man who hurt her?" Deborah considered the question and then said, "I hope he learns something from this, and I hope he chooses to be better." That night, she got a call. It was Elon. "I saw your interview," he said. "You did great." "Thank you," Deborah replied softly. "You know, the whole world saw what happened that night," Elon continued. "People will eventually forget the news, but they won't forget the lesson." Deborah smiled softly. "I hope so." She stepped back and looked at her dinner, where the setting sun had painted the sky blue. The world seemed a little quieter now, a little kinder. Not because the world had changed, but because she had changed. She grabbed her shoes from the corner and tied them. Tomorrow, she would make the journey again. Alone. Not because she was afraid, but because she refused to let fear win. As she opened the door, she took a deep breath, one step at a time, and she walked out. Here's what you should learn from this story. Never underestimate the power of standing up for someone, no matter how small the moment seems. It only takes one person to make a difference. If this story touched you, don't just skip it. The next time you see someone struggling, whether it's a neighbor, a stranger, or a friend, be the one to stand up. You never know what life you might change.